Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Stonks on Rails. And in this series, for the past several episodes, I've been building a stock scanner application that I'm using for my personal trading. And in this episode, I'm going to be adding some filtering to the application forms in Ruby on Rails. And I'm going to be showing you the data structures that I use to handle that information. So what I'm going to be paying attention to today is the market capitalization and price, because sometimes in my stock scanning reports, I get companies that are they're usually too small as far as market capitalization goes, or the price is like a penny stock thing, and that's not something that I'm interested in trading. So let's go take a look at the code. So here's an example of a report that I'll be looking at, the 52-week lows report. And I don't really have the filtering boxes in yet. I'm going to put those in just a little bit, but I do have the structure in place to process the information that will be passed in as parameters in the web request when you go to this URL. So here we are in the controller of my Rails application, and we're in the 52 weeks lows processing method of the controller. And as I showed in my previous videos, I'm building this report using an interactor class called 52-week low. And what I've added this time is a filters parameter, which I'm going to be passing into that interactor, and that's going to do some additional filtering on the items returned in that report. Now, to process the filters, they're actually coming from this filters method here. And remember, I'm using the the Ruby 3.1 feature where if you're submitting a hash and the hash variable is the same name as the key, all you have to do is hit filters colon, and I don't have to do the repetition of typing in the reference to the filters method. So here's the filters method, which processes the parameters. I'm building a structure here called report filters class, and that's going to be kind of a data container with a few convenience methods for processing this information. Let's take a closer look at this report filters class. Now, if you watched some of my previous videos, you know that in this folder here where I have containers for the actual report information that I'm passing into my view templates. Like here's an example, a container struct. This is a report container. It has report information about it, like the report type, the date, reviewed at, last updated at. And just like this top level container, the line items that go into the container, I'm going to have a special structure for holding the filtering information. Now, if you notice, all of these are actually struct types using the native Ruby feature called Struct. And Struct is actually a special class that's a little bit specialized in handling data. It allows you to declare different fields on the class that behave kind of like attributes. It makes it easy to initialize a class like this and populate with data, basically. And much like you can with any other Ruby class, you could do includes for different modules, and you could also add methods to a struct so that you could get different types of output. And in this case, like here I have as string, where you could take one of these particular fields and it'll do a reformatting here for the display on the report. In this case, though, I've decided maybe I don't want to use a struct, and instead I'm going to try using the Ruby on Rails ActiveModel Attributes feature. And all you have to do is include ActiveModel model and ActiveModel attributes, and you could have features that are very similar to what's offered by Ruby Struct. But one of the advantages that you do get with doing it as a class is automatic type coercion. So as you can see here, I have these attributes declared, and I have my market cap max, market cap min, price max, price min. I have these set as a float data type. So that means that if you put a string in here, it'll automatically coerce it to a float. Let me show you an example on the command line. All right, so market cap max, let's set this to $5 billion. Okay, so here's our instantiated class. And as you can see there, what we did was we typed in a string and it automatically converted it to a float. And this is going to be useful because we're taking parameters from the controller, as you can see here, and these params, they'll be coming in as strings. So if I do a binding.pry here, and I go back to our report, and we want to type in, let's say, a price min equals $20 for the stock. Now we could go here to our binding.pry session and see where it stopped. And params price min is a string of $20. Okay, but let's go ahead and try to build a struct out of that. Whoops, looks like it's putting some stuff out there. It's automatic typing it. But let's say that we run this line of code, and then we take a look at what's in that. It automatically coerced it to a float. And this is going to be useful for the comparisons that we're going to be doing later. It's a little bit of built-in automatic type checking for us. Now, I do have this in the structs directory, and this is really just a class and not a struct, so I'm thinking about renaming that, but I could get to that later. This is a little bit scrappy right now. And I kind of want to show you for comparison, this is our report filtering class, making use of the attribute declarations. And here's how you would do it as a struct. So basically, you could get the same results using the native Ruby struct, but I kind of liked using class in this instance, and I wanted to give it a try. And another advantage that we get out of doing it this way is that we could actually use class inheritance, whereas struct isn't really built for class inheritance, where you could have a common base class with similar attributes and do a descending classes from that. It's difficult to do with struct, but with using a regular class with attributes, it's a little bit more possible. Here, if you want to do a little bit of a side-by-side comparison, here it is. Here's the class with ActiveModel Attributes version, and here's the struct version. Both of these get you the same results. For the type coercion, though, if I were to do this as a struct, I could accomplish something very similar to what's automatically done with the Ruby on Rails attribute by overriding the initialize method here inside of struct. Now, one thing to notice too is that for the ranges, so we have the min and the max, and I use that to build a range that we're going to be using for filtering, and I have to do a little bit of conversion here on those numbers that are in here because I'm going to be entering single-digit numbers for billions in the market cap, but I have the market cap stored in thousands when you're looking at the actual report. And by the way, here I want to show you on this page here in the rubyonrails.org documentation, you could read all about the attribute method that's provided by this attributes module, and all the options that you could use. For example, you could also use default values, and it just gives you some tools for better managing data like this. Okay, so let's go back to our controller here, and we're going to the 52-week low interactor. And of course, most of the action I have is happening in the base class. That's where most of the methods are. In these descendant classes, I just have the query SQL and the custom things for the individual reports. So here on the command line, to show you what the report looks like behind the scenes, I'm going to take this piece of code and I'm going to run it inside of a Rails console. And this is kind of the structure that the program is sort of thinking in. And this is really useful for debugging. I do this a lot when I'm testing out ideas. I use the Rails console quite a bit. And here you can see what all the data types are and how it breaks down into sections and what the line items look like. So as you can see here, I have like the market cap. This is actually in thousands, so you would add 3 zeros to that. But for that particular filter that I'm using, that's going to be in billions, so you'd have to do some math here to change that. And that's kind of what I just showed you. Now, let's look back here at the controller, and I'll give you an overview of how the processing takes place. And by the way, one thing I wanted to remind you about is that if you sign up for my Patreon subscription, you could download the repo where all of this code is and take a look at it yourself. Use it as a coding example so you could actually play with the code. Just sign up for the Patreon and then send me a message, and then I'll add your GitHub username to the private repo. Let's dig back down in this interactor here. Here's the 52-week low class. And as I showed you in my previous video about how I broke this down, most of the action happens in the base class because this class is just for things specific to that report. So we're going to go to the base class, and here I have the filters parameter. If it's a nil, it'll initialize it with a blank set of filters. So then it gets the line items using build line item structs, and then it does the filtering here on filtered line items. And by the way, so build line item structs, this is an interesting idea I have here. If you notice, I have a lot of type coercions here that are explicit in this method here because I'm using a struct. So this struct doesn't have an automatic type coercion. I'm doing that over here with the try.toFloats, but I think it would be possible for me to change this line item struct to a class using the Rails attribute feature. And that way I could probably get rid of a lot of these and rely on the automatic type coercion. All right, so let's go back to the filtered line items. And here I have some chained method calls where it's going to do several rounds of filtering, or as many as I need. For other types of reports, I could probably override this inside of the descendant class, but here's what it looks like in the base class of the filtered line items. It takes the line items that are unfiltered, and then it uses the then here. So then is a Ruby method that you could use for chaining, where it'll put that object in there, and then it'll return the result of whatever you did to the object here. So in this case, we're filtering the market cap, and that goes here to this included module that I have here for filtering, and then it does a filter range by market cap. That range that's submitted, that does the comparison by, is the range filters.marketCapRange, and that was this method here that I showed you that does the conversion from the billions into the comparable number, and then makes it a Ruby range. So let's go back to our program, and we'll test this out a bit. As you can see here, this price min, I made $20, and as you can see here, there's nothing below $20 right now. It seems to be doing the filtering okay. And we have 231 items. Before, we had 485 on this report. So we could do that. We could also filter by market cap. Market cap min, we'll set that to, let's make it $10 billion. And as you can see here in the market cap column, everything is above $10 billion. If we want to get rid of some, or why don't we throw in the price filter here now. So we'll do price max equals nothing more than a $50 stock. We could throw that in there, and then it also adjusts the price. So we went down from 485 items down to 57 in the filter. Now all I've got to do is build some boxes here where I could submit the filters, probably along with this date here, and this date filtering here. So I would probably make them open-ended text boxes like that where I would type in the number. I'm going to do that and show you the result. And I'm back. And here, as you can see on the web page, I now have that little form there where we could type in what our filters are going to be. Give you a little demo here. So I'm going to change the market cap setting here to 15 billion. Okay, it limits the list a little bit. We could change the price filters. Why don't we change this one down to 30? That should limit our selection some more. I have this little feature here now where also if I click the checkbox, it will save these settings to the default so that when I come back to the web page, it will remember what filter I was looking at last time. So I'm going to run this through once, and then I'm going to take the URL and I'm going to copy it, and I'm just going to go open up a new tab here and go back to that page. And as you can see here, it remembers what the settings were. Okay, I'm going to show you how some of this code works under the hood now. So we're going to start from our controller, the 52-week lows here, where it builds a report. We have our filters as passing in, and here's how it processes the filters. We have this private method in the reports controller for the filters where it will build the filters data object from the parameters coming in. And if the parameters are empty, it will try to remember it from the cookie, which is how I'm doing the persisting of the settings if I want to persist them between settings, between sessions. Now, if we go to the top of the page here, notice I have this before action for save filters. And what that does is if I have the persist filters flag set, which is done by that checkbox, it'll save whatever the current filters are to the cookie in a JSON format. So now let's go back to the data object where I did a few little modifications here while I was working on that front end. I made a new namespace called data defs. Well, actually I renamed the structs namespace to data defs. And I made a base class called data def base, which I'm going to use to share certain boilerplate code between all of the classes that I'm going to be using for this purpose now. So it has the ActiveModel model and ActiveModel attributes includes here. By the way, the order that you call them matters. You need to have the model come first. By the way, one thing that I want to note is that when I was researching this topic, I found out that in Ruby 3.2, they're working on the feature called value objects, where they're going to add a new data type that's very similar to struct, but it's more specialized for immutable data. And I have a link to that discussion on the Ruby message board here in the video description, but it's an interesting discussion, touches on what we're talking about today, and I encourage you to check it out and read it. Okay, going back to this program now, here's what I did in the front end templates. I did a little bit of rearranging here. I'm using form width now at the level of the header. So before I had just the date picker form, and let's look at the date picker, which is a much more simplified partial now. Originally, I had the form, the entire form for changing the date here, and now I just have the text field, which is part of the form. And also notice that this form tag is now form width when you're using Rails 7. So in previous versions of Rails, there was form tag and form for, which were your helpers for building a form. Now they've consolidated that with this new method to call called form width. Also, another interesting thing I noticed about the date picker is that I could just make the data controller specified here on the text field, and the component works just fine still. And last but not least, I'm going to take you to the filters partial where I have the code here that builds that little form. Anyway, that's my program and the current iteration of where I'm at right now. If you found this interesting and learned something fun about Ruby today, give me a thumbs up on the video and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Also, if you want to take a look at this code for yourself, then sign up for my Patreon subscription and send me your GitHub username. I'll add you to the private GitHub repository. All right, that's it for today. See you in the next video.